He didn't knock. He never did anymore. I was in the workshop behind the house, sanding the edge of a cabinet door I'd been working on since sunrise. The smell of pine dust hung in the air, the same smell that had followed me through most of my adult life. That shop had raised my son as much as I had. After school, after dinner, on weekends, he was always there, handing me nails, sweeping the floor, asking questions. That morning, he walked in without saying my name. He set a white envelope down on the workbench, right next to my coffee mug. He didn't slide it. He placed it carefully, like it mattered. On the front, in his handwriting, were 6 words that stopped my hands mid-motion. Dad, I'm not your son. For a second, I honestly thought it was a joke. Not a funny one, but something awkward, poorly timed, something he'd regret in about 10 seconds. I waited for the punchline. It didn't come. Read it, he said. His voice was steady, too steady. That's when I knew this wasn't anger. It was something colder, something rehearsed. I didn't open the envelope right away. I just looked at him, really looked. 42 years old, broad shoulders, confident posture. The same hands I'd once wrapped bandages around after he cut himself trying to use a table saw at 15. My hands were still dusty. My fingers shook, just enough to annoy me. Is this about the house? I asked. He exhaled through his nose, like I'd finally said something obvious. It's about reality, he replied. About putting things where they belong. That's when I realized this wasn't just a conversation. It was a decision he'd already made. Inside the envelope was a neatly printed plan. Dates, times, addresses. A timeline for my life that didn't include my opinion. A place for me to move. A date for transition. A note at the bottom that read, "This is the most practical solution for everyone involved." Everyone. Not me. Everyone. He watched my face carefully, like he was checking for damage. When I didn't react the way he expected, he added, "I'm not trying to hurt you, but we need to be honest. Blood matters. That's just how life works. Blood matters." I've heard those words before. Usually from people who never stayed up all night with a sick kid. Never skipped meals so someone else could eat. Never stood in the rain at a high school graduation, pretending not to cry. I folded the paper once, then again. "You raised me," he continued, almost kindly, "and I appreciate that. But raising someone doesn't make you their father forever. You did what you were supposed to do." Supposed to do. That was the moment something shifted in my chest. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a quiet, final click, like a door closing somewhere deep inside. I nodded, because arguing felt pointless, because explaining felt too small. "Okay," I said. That surprised him. He straightened up, clearly relieved. "Good. I knew you'd understand." He turned to leave, confident, already moving on to the next part of his day. He didn't see me reach for the bottom drawer of my workbench, the one I'd kept closed for years. If you think this is just another revenge story, stick with me for a minute. Because what my son didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment long before he ever put those words on an envelope. And the truth he was about to face wasn't written on paper. It was written in everything he tried to erase. For a long time, I believed fatherhood had an end point. Not a dramatic one, not a finish line with applause. Just a quiet moment where you look at your grown child and think, "You'll be fine now." I thought that moment had come years ago. I raised my son the only way I knew how, by showing up every day, even when I was tired, even when money was thin, even when nobody was watching. There were no speeches about sacrifice, just habits. Early mornings, late nights, doing what needed to be done and going to bed sore. The workshop was where most of it happened. That space wasn't just for wood and tools. It was where homework got finished, at the corner of the bench, where scraped knuckles were wrapped in old shop towels, where I taught him how to measure twice, cut once, and what happens when you don't. Some nights, he'd sit on an upside-down bucket and talk while I worked. About school, about friends, about things he didn't know how to say yet. I listened more than I spoke. That seemed important. When his mother left, I didn't explain it in ways a child couldn't carry. I just told him, "I'm here." And then I made sure that stayed true. I worked jobs that paid enough, not ones that impressed people. I fixed what broke instead of replacing it. I learned how to stretch a dollar without making him feel poor. When it came time for college, I didn't give speeches about gratitude. I just wrote checks and kept quiet. That was the deal I made with myself. If he grows up strong, independent, and decent, I don't need credit. By the time he moved out, I thought I'd succeeded. He had a career, a family, confidence. The kind of confidence that made me step back and say, "Good, he doesn't need me anymore." And I was proud of that. I really was. I know some of you listening might recognize that feeling, that strange mix of pride and loneliness when the house gets quieter. But you tell yourself that's how it's supposed to be. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. I didn't hover. I didn't interfere. When he stopped calling as often, I told myself that was normal. When holidays got shorter, I adjusted. When advice went unasked, I kept it to myself. I thought that was respect. What I didn't realize was that silence can be misunderstood. That patience can look like weakness to someone who stopped remembering how they got where they are. I never once sat him down and listed what I'd done. Never reminded him of the nights I skipped meals so he wouldn't notice the pantry getting thin. Never pointed to the calluses on my hands and said, "This is why you're standing where you are." Because that's not what fathers do. Or at least, that's what I believed. Looking back now, I wonder if that was my mistake. Not the sacrifices, but assuming they were understood. I honestly thought my role had ended, that I'd already paid whatever price was required to earn the word "dad" for life. Standing in that workshop after he handed me that envelope, I realized how wrong I'd been. Fatherhood, it turns out, doesn't end when your child grows up. Sometimes, that's exactly when it gets tested. It didn't start with the envelope. That's the part that took me the longest to admit. The truth is, the first cracks showed up quietly, the way important things often do. No arguments, no slammed doors. Just small shifts in tone that were easy to excuse if you wanted to keep the peace. The first time I felt it, we were having dinner. Nothing special, takeout on paper plates, the kind of night that didn't deserve to be remembered. I made a comment about how hard things had been when he was younger, how proud I was of the man he'd become. He nodded, barely looking up from his phone. "Well," he said, "that's what parents are supposed to do." Supposed to do. The words landed wrong, but I let it go. I told myself I was reading too much into it. He was busy, tired. That's what I told myself a lot back then. After that, it became a pattern. Whenever I mentioned the past, long nights, tight money, choices I'd made so he wouldn't have to, he'd smile politely and steer the conversation somewhere else. Or worse, he'd correct me. "You didn't really sacrifice," he said once. "You just worked. Everyone works." I remember standing there, holding my coffee, feeling something tighten in my chest. Not anger, confusion. Like I was listening to someone talk about a life I didn't recognize. Another time, he laughed when I mentioned teaching him in the workshop. "You make it sound bigger than it was," he said. "You were around, that's it." That's it. I didn't argue. I never did. I figured maybe this was part of growing up, reframing the past so you don't feel like you owe anyone anything. I didn't want to be the kind of father who demanded gratitude. I'd seen men like that. I promised myself I'd never become one. So I stayed quiet. But the comments kept coming. "You helped, sure," he said one afternoon, leaning against my truck. "But helping someone doesn't make you family forever. Blood does that." Blood. He said it casually, like it was common sense. Like it was something everyone agreed on but me. That was the first time I felt embarrassed for reasons I couldn't explain. Embarrassed for having believed that love counted for more than genetics. Embarrassed for assuming years of showing up had earned me something permanent. I started noticing how he talked about me when other people were around. He did his best, he'd say. He stepped in when things were rough. He meant well. All past tense, all polite, all distant. It was like he was slowly moving me from the center of his story to the footnotes. I told myself not to take it personally. Told myself this was normal. Told myself I was lucky he still included me at all. That's how it works, right? Children grow up. Parents fade into the background. Still, something about the way he spoke made me feel smaller. Like my role had expired and nobody had bothered to tell me. One night after he left, I stood alone in the workshop and looked around. At the bench where he'd learned to measure. At the pegboard where his height marks were still penciled in. At the old stool he used to sit on when his legs were too short to reach the floor. I realized then that he wasn't just distancing himself. He was rewriting the story. And in his version, I wasn't a father who gave his life to raise a son. I was just a man who happened to be there. That was the first real crack. I just didn't know yet how far it was going to spread. I opened the envelope after he left the room. Not right away. I stood there for a while, listening to the shop settle. The soft tick of cooling metal, the hum of the old light fixture. I wanted to make sure my hands were steady before I unfolded anything. Pride does strange things to a man. It tells you to look strong, even when no one's watching. Inside was not a letter. It was a plan. Pages neatly stacked, typed, numbered. Headings in bold, like a proposal you'd hand to a bank or a contractor. Dates, addresses, contact names. A timeline that moved with quiet efficiency from discussion to transition to completion. My name appeared in it the way furniture does in a moving inventory. There was a place picked out for me. Clean, organized. Age appropriate, 15 minutes from the house. A monthly fee already calculated. A start date circled in blue ink, like someone marking a deadline on a calendar they didn't plan to miss. He'd even included a section titled Benefits. It explained how this would be best for everyone involved. How I wouldn't have to worry about maintenance anymore. How my needs would be met. How the house could finally be used the way it was meant to be used. Used. I noticed my opinions weren't mentioned anywhere, not once. At the bottom of the last page, there was a short, handwritten note, squeezed into the margin as if to soften the blow. "I'll handle the logistics. You won't need to worry about a thing." That line hurt more than the rest, because worrying had been my job for most of his life. I worried about rent when work slowed down. I worried about tuition deadlines. I worried about what kind of man he'd become when I wasn't around to steer him anymore. Now, apparently, my worrying was the problem. When he came back, I was still standing at the bench, the papers folded neatly in front of me. He looked relieved, like someone who expects resistance and is grateful when it doesn't come. "It's straightforward," he said. "I tried to keep emotion out of it." I nodded. "You did." He took that as approval. "My wife's parents will move in," he continued, already thinking 3 steps ahead. "They'll take over payments, handle upkeep. The house stays in the family." The family. I noticed how easily that word changed shape depending on who was speaking. "You'll like the place," he added. "There are activities, people your age. It's not what you think." I wanted to ask him what he thought I thought. I wanted to ask when exactly I stopped being capable of deciding where I belonged. But the words stayed where they were. Instead, I asked, "When did you decide this?" He hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "I've been thinking about it for a while." That was the moment I understood something important. This wasn't a reaction. It was a conclusion. He hadn't brought me a question. He'd brought me an outcome. One he'd already justified to himself. One he believed was reasonable, even kind. In his mind, he wasn't taking anything from me. He was organizing what was left. I folded the papers again, carefully, the way I taught him to fold shop rags so they'd last longer. "All right," I said quietly. His shoulders relaxed. He smiled, just a little. "I knew you'd see it my way." He left the shop then, confident, unburdened, already living in the future he'd arranged. I stayed where I was, holding a plan that reduced 30 years of raising a child to a logistical inconvenience. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about where I would live. It was about whether anything I'd done still mattered at all. There are things a man can carry in private. A sharp word, a cold look, even a quiet dismissal if it happens behind closed doors. You tell yourself it's between you and your child. You protect the family name by keeping your mouth shut. But there's a different kind of pain when it's said out loud, when other people are there. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. Nothing dramatic on the surface. Just a family gathering. Coffee on the table, chairs pulled close, conversation drifting the way it always did. I remember thinking, this feels normal. I remember almost believing it. Someone asked the harmless question about the house, about how long I'd lived there. Before I could answer, my son spoke. "Well," he said, smiling like he was being helpful, "it's probably time Dad downsizes anyway." Dad. He said it the way people say an old nickname they're about to retire. I looked at him, waiting for him to add something, some softening phrase, some sign that he realized how that sounded. He didn't. "The truth is," he continued, "this place is bigger than he needs. It makes more sense for it to stay with real family." The room went quiet. I felt every eye shift, just slightly, in my direction. Not in judgment, in confusion. In that uncomfortable way people look when they don't know whether they've just witnessed something they weren't meant to see. I cleared my throat. "What do you mean by real family?" He didn't hesitate. That was the part that hurt the most. "I mean blood," he said calmly. "Biology. I'm not saying you didn't help. You did. But helping someone doesn't make you their father forever. Forever. Like fatherhood had an expiration date I'd somehow missed. I felt my face warm, the way it does when embarrassment hits before anger. I wanted to disappear, not because I was ashamed of what I'd done, but because he was reducing it to something small, something temporary. Someone shifted in their chair. Someone else picked up their cup and put it down again without drinking. "You were there when I needed support," he went on, "and I'm grateful for that. But gratitude isn't the same thing as family. Grateful. Like I'd held a door open. Like I'd offered directions." I thought about the nights I'd slept on the floor outside his room when he was sick. The weekends I'd turned down work so I could watch him play. The years I'd measured my life in what he needed next. None of that seemed to qualify. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just nodded once, because doing anything else felt like begging for recognition I shouldn't have to ask for. In that moment, something settled in my chest. Not anger, not sadness, but a heavy understanding. He wasn't confused about what he was saying. He believed it. Believed that what I'd given was a phase, a service, a role that had run its course. And saying it in front of others wasn't a mistake. It was confirmation. A way of making it official. As the conversation moved on, I stayed quiet, my hands folded, my mind somewhere far away. I realized that being dismissed in private hurts. But being erased in public? That changes something. Because once a man hears his own child say, out loud, that his years of sacrifice don't count, there's no unhearing it. And there's no going back to pretending everything is fine. Silence can be louder than shouting. After he said it, out loud, in front of everyone, no one rushed to fill the space. Plates sat untouched. Coffee went cold. The room held its breath, waiting for something to happen. I felt it first in my shoulders. That familiar urge to smooth things over, to say it's fine when it isn't. To protect him from the consequences of his own words, the way I always had. He took a step toward me, confident now, like a man who believes the hardest part is over. "Dad," he said, softer, "you know I didn't mean it harshly. This is just how life works." That was when it happened. His heel caught the edge of the old rug, the one I'd refused to throw out because he'd spilled paint on it when he was 10. He didn't fall. He didn't even stumble much. Just a half step forward, a quick grab at the air, a pause that lasted maybe a second. But it was enough. Enough for the room to notice. Enough for his words to hang there, suddenly unsupported. He froze, standing awkwardly, deciding whether to laugh it off or pretend nothing happened. No one laughed. No one said a word. The moment passed, small and quiet, but it landed exactly where it needed to. I didn't smile. I didn't react at all. I just watched him steady himself, straighten his jacket, and continue as if nothing had interrupted him. Because something had. Not his footing, his certainty. He cleared his throat. "Anyway," he said, trying to regain control, "we're just being realistic." Realistic. That word again. As if reality were something he owned. I realized then how different we were in that moment. He was talking about efficiency, about outcomes, about arranging people like furniture so everything fit neatly. I was thinking about the rug, about why it was still there, about the small, ordinary messes that make a place a home. The kind you don't notice until someone tries to step over them too quickly. No one defended me. No one needed to, because the damage had already been done by him. When the conversation finally ended, people left in pairs, murmuring polite goodbyes, avoiding my eyes the way people do when they don't know what to say. My son lingered near the door. "You'll think about it," he said, not asking. "I already am," I replied. He nodded, satisfied, and walked out, convinced he'd won something important. I stayed behind, alone in the quiet, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle fully in my chest. That small slip, so insignificant on its own, had shown me something clearly for the first time. He wasn't just pushing me aside. He was standing on everything I'd built to lift himself higher. And I understood then that staying silent any longer wouldn't protect either of us. If you're listening to this and something in that moment felt familiar, if you've ever swallowed words to keep the peace or watched someone step over your years like they were nothing, take a second and sit with that feeling. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to justify it. Just know you're not the only one who's felt the floor shift under someone else's certainty. And sometimes that pause, the moment when everything goes quiet, is where the truth finally has room to stand. That night, I didn't clean up the room. The cups stayed where they were. The rug stayed crooked. I sat alone longer than I needed to, listening to the house breathe the way it always had. I kept thinking about the way he'd said the word family, so sure of himself. I hadn't said my last word, but I hadn't said the right one yet either. And somewhere in the quiet, I understood this wasn't over. It was only paused.